Again, my name is Nancy Movick. I am the Director of Compassion Ministries at Discovery Church, and I've been there for about 8 years now. We're just so thrilled to be with you this evening. At Discovery Church, we believe that we are called to stand in the gap for our local neighbors and serve with a heart of reciprocity, dignity, and solidarity. And solidarity requires a posture of learning from each other and discovering how we are more similar than different. Tonight, we have the great privilege of hearing from some of our local experts on the subject of homelessness and housing instability. Discovery is passionate about partnerships that break the local and global poverty cycles. So I'm honored to have the privilege of introducing our 4 guests. Dawn Burns. Dawn, you want to wave at us? Great. Founder of the Burns Institute for Poverty Research at the Colorado Center of Law and Policy. Marty Dormish. Marty is a Minister of Community Engagement at the Refuge Church in Broomfield. Susan Lithgow is the Executive Director of Flatirons Habitat for Humanity, and John Marreri, Vice President of Operations with the Denver Rescue Mission. Just a few housekeeping details. If you would please, you're welcome at any time to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and we'll be getting to our questions towards the end of the webinar. And so I think we're set. We'll be addressing 3 questions, and the panelists will have a few minutes each to answer. So we're going to go to our first question. Marty, I'm going to go to you first, so be sure and unmute. Can you take the next 3 minutes and help us dispel some common misconceptions about homelessness?
Sure, thanks, Nancy. And it's a pleasure to be here tonight with everyone and with the other panelists. I'd like first to say that I think the language that we use in dialogues like these is extremely important and revealing, and that even down to the detail of how we refer to people who are experiencing certain situations. So for example, I've heard people all the way from everyday residents to high-level civic officials say things like the homeless, or even homeless with no article, in referring to people that are in difficult housing situations. And a lot of the time, I think it's even unconscious. So that's something that I have been in the process of learning myself, and I would just challenge everyone who's here tonight to think about how you refer to people that are in difficult situations. I'd say among our specific misconceptions about homelessness in particular is that to be homeless is only to be in a situation where you find yourself holding a sign that says anything helps on the side of an off-ramp or an intersection, or that you live in a tent city downtown. But there are also many other experiences of homelessness, especially in what we might refer to as the suburbs, places like Broomfield. So that includes people living in their cars or sleeping at night in a tent hidden in plain sight. And that could be on the side of a busy road, or it could be families who are couch hopping, staying at times with family members, or other times with friends, or other times in a cheap motel. And a lot of times people in these situations are working and juggling school, getting kids to school, and doing all that in the middle of severe housing instability. A couple of the stories that I'd like to share just very briefly involve, and I won't share names in this case, but I've met in my work at the Refuge Cafe, where we encounter a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness. I've met a millionaire. So he lost his money on the stock market and ended up sleeping in his car. And he actually, the particular person I'm thinking of, has been in that situation for a decade. And then I think of another man that I've met through the cafe, and he's an engineer and a scientist, very intelligent person who, through some different circumstances, became estranged from his wife and kids. And he's lived outside for the past couple of years. And so these are people who came from resources, and certain things happened. And so the last thing that I would say too is that The other misconception I wanted to point out tonight is that I think when we think about homelessness normally, it's usually about the people who are in that situation. People who are on the verge of being evicted, or people who are outside. And that's true in part. That is part of the equation, of course. But I would really reverse the question in a sense and ask, what does the existence of homelessness in our society, in our metro area, and in our city and county say about us as a society and as a people? So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Marty. That's really challenging and just really thoughtful. Thank you. Susan, would you like to add your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Nancy, and thank you for having me here this evening. You know, I echo everything that Marty said in terms of the perceptions and misperceptions around folks who are experiencing housing instability. You know, we get calls at Habitat for Humanity weekly from people who are looking to get a home for either themselves or for a friend or loved one who needs housing immediately. They may be experiencing homeless. They may be facing eviction for non-payment of their rent, or if their rent is about to go up to an amount that they just can't possibly afford. And it's, as Marty said, it's not unusual for people to be employed but living in their cars. As a former teacher, it was always striking, particularly with low-income students in classes with which I worked, who had to move every 6 months because as their rent went up, their parents had to find somewhere else. It's all housing instability, and it has such a great impact on us as a community. You know, just this past weekend, we worked with Fish to find a place for a retired private school teacher who is on a very low fixed income. And we got her into our co-housing rental for independent older adults, where she'll have social interaction and safe, stable, affordable housing. But as of Friday, she was going to be homeless. And so many people are just one check away from not having somewhere to live. And a lot of the scenarios that Martin was talking about then suddenly come into play.
Thank you, Susan. And good reminder too, of just like how many people are just a check away from having unstable housing. John, would you care to share next?
Sure. I mean, I think Marty did a great job of talking about how we view it. I'll share personally. You know, I started the mission 12 years ago, and I viewed it as a stop along my journey. It was going to be I wanted to go overseas and serve folks who truly needed help. That's how I thought about it. And so I was going to learn some skills that was going to allow me to do that. And as so many folks that once you get into this line of work, you realize is that there's not a lot of difference between us and those experiencing homelessness. Sometimes it's a key relationship. Sometimes it's fortune. Sometimes it's a lot of different things. And I remember talking a few years ago to a gentleman, and he's in his late 40s, and he had joined one of our programs and was working alongside of us, helping put on a turkey drive that we do. We have 15,000 turkeys come through. We give them to a lot of organizations. And we really believe in the program of having them work alongside of us. And they don't work for us. We need them to do the work with us. And I was talking to him, and we shared similar stories. My father passed away when I was young, and his father left when he was young. And so we both dealt with this wound in us. And his journey led that he started drinking at 12. And it was the first time he was sober till he was in his late 40s. I really have not had an addiction with alcohol, but to hear our stories, I also reflected on my own ways that I've learned to cope. and how that's affected me in my life. And I just realized in that moment, we're just not so different from each other. We share a lot of the same stories. We share a lot of the same things. And in that moment, I think I realized I could be him and he could be me. He could be someone that helped folks, and I could be someone that needed help in that moment. And so, for a lot of us, I think I just invite you to have conversations with folks. It's what's really turned things for me. It breaks down misconceptions and barriers. It breaks down an us versus them mentality. And I love talking to folks who are in our program. Just said, hey, tell me your story. Where did this start for you? And I think what you'll find along the way is so many of us share so many things in common and lack a lot of those things that make us dissimilar from each other. And in my view, we all need hope. And I think we're all looking for that in different things. I think the American dream sells a very compelling version of hope that then comes crashing down on a lot of people, especially in an economy like this, everything you build. I think a lot of people are in the business of selling hope. And I think depending on where you put that, you can either really find yourself in a very stable place, or you can find yourself in a very unstable place. I think that's really reflective of where we are in a country, is that people put hopes in things that aren't materializing, and they're frustrated and they're angry. And so I just encourage people to have conversations. I think that's one of the most powerful things. In a world of connectivity, we're often mostly disconnected from each other. And so not just in terms of social media and how that disconnects, but in terms of how our neighborhoods are built, how our cities are laid out, often leads to disconnection. And so just encourage folks to have a connection, have a conversation. And I think that often we really connect in powerful ways. So.
Thank you, John. And I love that you just really shared like how you guys are moving towards people with solidarity and also with reciprocity. So thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Don. If you could share a little bit about your thoughts of the question.
Absolutely. And thank you very much, Nancy, for inviting me to be part of this. And good evening to all of you. This is a tough trio to follow because I think all of you have said some very important things. For most of us, our only direct connection with the issue of homelessness is people we see. And the people we see are, as Marty said, the guys flying signs, the bag lady pushing a cart piled high with all of her worldly possessions, some poor guy yelling at visions, obviously out of his, mentally ill, or people lying on the sidewalk. And unfortunately, those folks reinforce all the negative stereotypes about people experiencing homelessness. In fact, and I have to confess, I'm a policy junkie, so I like numbers. So I'm going to share a couple of numbers with you. We know from both local and national polls and surveys that those folks represent a small portion of the total population, some 15 to 20% of the total population. The rest are, as our other three panelists have described, they live in shelters. They're youth, unaccompanied youth. There are people who are working but can't afford to pay rent. And they represent 80 to 85% of the total population of people experiencing homelessness. So most of us have this very distorted view of who the homeless folks are. Now, that raises the question of what causes homelessness. And some people will say it's personal failings. My strong argument is that it's the failure of various systems in our country. It's the high cost of housing and the lack of adequate housing. inadequate wages, poor jobs, the high cost of healthcare, the high cost of childcare, the high cost of transportation, and systemic and complete racism around the country. And if we're going to address the problem properly, we've got to address those systems and stop worrying about, quote, personal failures and start thinking about systems. The other thing I would say is that the conventional wisdom is they're there because they're lazy, crazy, drunks, druggies, or they've made bad decisions. I can assure you that there are many more people in this country who are housed, who are lazy, crazy, drunks, druggies, and who among us has never made a bad decision? I think it is important to think, and this gets back to what Marty was saying originally, homelessness is a context, a situation, not a personal attribute. And we have to start thinking in those terms. It's people experiencing homelessness, not homeless people. Thank you.
Well, you guys have got goosebumps. Thank you so much for just sharing and helping us reframe what we maybe thought was true. I think that's the first step in being able to move towards, is just to understand that we frame things inappropriately and that there's things to learn. So thank you. We're going to move on to our second question. And the way I want to do this is that I like the panelists to all unmute and feel like they can just pop in as they want to. The question is, how has the pandemic affected individuals with housing insecurity, created more need for emergency housing, and complicated efforts to provide shelter for them? So feel free to just jump on. We might interrupt one another, but that's okay.
First
Okay,
of all,
Donald, you go.
Susan, go ahead. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think one of the most compelling examples for me happened in April, 3 days before we were ready to close on a home with one of our home buyers who was furloughed Friday. She was scheduled to close on her home Tuesday. The bank will not take unemployment insurance for a mortgage, even with everything that I'm able to negotiate for an affordable mortgage with our bank, with our lenders. She'd worked for over a year to get that home. Now, none of us saw it coming. She worked for a nonprofit. Fortunately, the payroll protection program kicked in and we were able to close on her home a couple of weeks later. But that's someone who did everything right. And the pandemic almost completely upended her ability to become a homeowner, which was just terrifying.
Thank you, Susan.
I was going to add that the guidance from the CDC and from other sources is sheltering in place. And for most of us, that means sheltering at home. What happens when you don't have a home in which to shelter? You end up in a large congregate shelter with 200 or 300 or 500 other people, and there's not enough space for safe distancing, or you sleep outside. And even the shelters are not appropriate for some people. For example, many shelters will not allow a couple to stay together. Most shelters will not allow a companion animal. And I know you have all heard that dog is man's best friend. Well, we have to reconsider the concept of family, because that dog for that person is part of his or her family. So why shouldn't a family member also be allowed into the shelter. And given the pandemic, it's gotten even worse. The other thing is many cities, including Broomfield, is trying this also, to find hotel or motel spaces for people to socially isolate. In some respects, that's wonderful. But what it does is to increase the social isolation of that person. And going back to what John was talking about in terms of relationships, we call it relational poverty. And relational poverty is, in some respects, poverty at its very worst. And so how do you create networks of support for people who are isolated in hotels and motels? I'll stop there.
Let me just remind our attendees that we're taking questions all the way through this. So if you have a question that comes up, please add it to the Q&A and we'll get to it in a little bit. I'm turning it back over to the panelists here.
I think for the Denver Rescue Mission, in terms of systems, I think that the capacity of the systems has really been stretched. I think as Don talked about, a lot of how we had done sheltering prior was 200 to 300 people in a smaller space, same gender, a lot of the same things, same challenges that Don talked about. And now, as we've really attempted to answer the call on social distancing requirements, we've really seen a pinch in the system for adequate need of capacity. And so a lot of the conversations that the Rescue Mission is having with the city of Denver, I know a lot of communities like Broomfield are also having is, what does our capacity look like? Right now in Denver, for example, there's a lot of hotel rooms that are funded through the CARES Act. And as that funding goes away at the end of the year, where are we going to put hundreds of people in hotels that are in hotels now? Where are they going to go? And what are we going to do? And so I think as Susan's working on kind of the opposite scale of the problem of where I'm at, on our side, in terms of capacity, it's just looking at wanting to give as much dignity to people as possible, as much space as we can in light of the CDC guidelines, while also trying to balance the need for trying to have a place once it gets cold for everybody to come inside to, if that's possible. And so those are just challenges, active challenges that I think a lot of communities are wrestling through. And I think that's why you see the emergence of safe outdoor spaces, a lot of different things like that. Is I think people are just trying to find solutions to these challenges in the midst of having to make very quick decisions. And oftentimes, even when we do make a quick decision, the ability to put things into practice takes a while. So yeah, that's what I would say on the rescue mission side.
And John, I worry months down the road when evictions and foreclosures start, that your systems are going to be pressed even more because delaying them doesn't make them go away. Yeah. And even we'll modify mortgages if we have to, but there's only so much I can do legally with a mortgage, and we'll figure something out. But not all lenders are going to be that understanding, and not all landlords are going to be understanding. And at the same time, landlords are being pinched. If they're not getting the rent, they need to pay their mortgages as well. As you say, it's a huge systemic failure right now. And I wish I had solutions, quick solutions.
I would just add, oh, is that you, Don?
No, go ahead.
I would just add that, and I agree with what everyone has shared. I would say that even before COVID, the system that we've been discussing was already very difficult to negotiate and navigate for people who were on the client side of things. And COVID has just made, just like a lot of different areas, COVID has made that way worse. And it's revealed gaps that already existed in our community and just made them way worse. So Susan referred to the possibility of evictions and foreclosures, and those are on the horizon in many communities. Fortunately, to this point, at least, Broomfield has not seen a marked increase in evictions. And Broomfield City Council has been active and actually kind of pioneering in the sense in our area of passing a moratorium on late fees for people who aren't able to pay their rent on time. And in addition to that, Susan also mentioned that landlords are being pinched too. And so the city, at least locally, the city is undertaken a really great effort to do an awareness campaign for resources, both for landlords and for renters. And then also on the other side for homeowners who might be facing foreclosure. And that's on the city website if anybody wants to search that. I don't have the link at my fingertips, but it's not difficult to find. And I would say that there isn't a statistical number of evictions that are happening in Broomfield, but most instances in Broomfield, from my experience, are more like pseudo evictions. So because having an eviction on your record is so much of a scarlet letter, some landlords often pressure their renters to leave the house before they have to evict them. And so people end up in the same situation, but they don't want to have that on their record. So those numbers, there's no really good way to count those numbers. And if someone out there has a way to count those numbers, or Don, if you can work your genius magic and figure that out, I would love to know those numbers, because I think a lot of those happen under the radar that people aren't aware of. And it really is not, it's not a humane practice for a community. It's not okay for a community like Broomfield for things like that to be happening. And then I would just add too that recent statistics for Broomfield itself have shown that those who are severely cost burdened, which means that they spend more than 50% of their income on housing, and that's a HUD definition. It's been in place for a long time, that those people are technically at risk of homelessness. And in Broomfield, 1 of every 4 rental households is severely cost burdened. So let that sink in. That's a lot of people in our community. So, you know, it only takes 1 or 2 things, just like has already been said, that a lot of people don't have a lot of margin. And so it only takes 1 or 2 unwelcome situations, like a car breakdown or a job loss or a sickness, to really threaten a family's housing.
Or a sick family member.
Yeah.
Family member. Exactly.
I was going to add that a couple of years ago, the Federal Reserve Board did a study, and they did a survey, a nationally representative survey, and almost half of the people who were surveyed said that if they had an unexpected expense of $400 or more, they would have to borrow money. And borrowing money means either going to your family, going to friends, or going to the bank. And most of the people experiencing homelessness don't have those kinds of resources available. And they certainly cannot get a loan from a bank. So one of the issues that we don't talk enough about is prevention. How do you prevent people from becoming homeless to begin with? And we really need to pay more attention to that. And I think, you know, Marty and Susan and John in Denver are working on that, but we've got to do a lot better job with that. The other thing I would add is that one researcher has recently estimated that because of the pandemic, the total number of people experiencing homelessness is likely to increase by 40 to 50%. Which means nationally, we're talking 800,000 people. In Denver, we're talking, the city of Denver, we're talking 8,000 people across the metro area, 15,000 people. And those numbers get very scary very quickly. I mean, they're scary now, but those numbers get very scary very quickly. And we're not doing an adequate job of addressing the problem.
So kind of to stay on that same question, like, how have you seen like the pandemic, like kind of those crevasses that we have in our systems, like become like the awareness of them actually helping your organizations kind of get the word out or convince people that this is is really a big deal? Like, how has that changed the conversation about homelessness and housing instability?
For us, we're actually in year 2 of a nationwide cost of home campaign. And so I can't say that the pandemic has made a huge difference because we were already well on our way. But what I've seen in the immediate area, Broomfield and surrounding areas in the last probably 3 years, is an increased awareness that there is a problem, which is the first step. We all know that. And so I think simply the fact that organizations like yours are having panels like this probably wouldn't have happened before the pandemic. As hard as everyone was working on it, I'm not sure that this conversation as a wide community conversation would have necessarily taken place. So that's the upside to it is, we're very far behind the 8 ball on this issue, but we now are painfully aware of just how serious this issue is.
Thank you, Susan. Anybody else?
One of the things, and John referred to safe outdoor spaces. This is one of the kinds of sort of temporary solutions that has been put forward given the pandemic. And the thing that bothers me is, and this is true in Denver, the city and the Housing Stability Group has identified 2 different locations which have been vetoed by the community. I mean, they're all set to start a safe outdoor space. They want to create more tiny home villages and neighborhoods. It's the old not in my backyard syndrome. And somehow we have got to help people understand that this is a total community. And we have to regard everybody's humanity as part of our own. And we have to accept folks for who they are and what they can produce and provide for the community. And we're not there yet.
Thank you, Don. Anyone else?
Nancy, I'm not sure I'm going to 100% answer your question, but I'll give a few pieces here. I think one of the things that the pandemic has forced us to deal with is, in our context, are these big congregant shelters, right? These big shelters. And before the pandemic, a lot of folks would come in and they would either, depending on where they went, they would face a lottery system per night, or they would get a bed per night. And then during the day, they would have to go out into the community. There was a few places like St. Francis Center that had indoor space, or like us that had kind of an outdoor courtyard that you could visit, but it was transient. You had to move around from place to place. And I think one of the things that's been good in this is, I think prior to this, our Denver Rescue Mission's comfort around 24/7 shelter, we just never done it before. We didn't really know what that looked like. And so when we were forced to do this through the pandemic, I think we've learned a lot of new things. And so I think one of the things that I'm hopeful from in the midst of the pandemic is, I think a lot of our old ways of doing things are are either coming under so much strain that they're breaking, or we're being forced to change through CDC guidance or whatever the case may be. And we're having to respond in kind of real time to the situations. And hopefully the reset is causing us to do some things that really are going to benefit folks. Often I'll talk to my counterparts in the programs side, and they share stories around, now that they are somewhere for one of our guests to stay all day, we can connect with them in case management. Before, hey, do you want to meet with me at 2:00? Well, once they started heading out into the community that day and whatever they had to do, to be able to sometimes make a 2:00 case management meeting was really difficult, or to meet with this provider that was going to hopefully, VA that was going to provide them to VA housing was difficult. But now with all these folks, we know who they are. They have a bed with us. They're staying with us. They're getting meals with us. Our ability to connect them to services has gone up. And we're seeing, I think the word I keep hearing from our program counterparts is there's a hunger for this. And so I think that's been one of the benefits of how this has worked. It's really worked, I think, to everybody's favor. And so I also would say, though, is, and again, I kind of said this in my first answer, but, I think when most of us reflect on the pandemic, there's been a lot of stresses in life. A lot of things have changed, a lot of normals have changed. And so the goalposts have moved, and there's a lot of frustration around those things. And I think just as we're experiencing that, folks experiencing homelessness are experiencing that as well. And so I think giving an ability for everyone to kind of mourn what the season has caused. I think I keep hearing this a lot in the season. Our theology around mourning and lamentation is really not one that we like to talk about in America. It's not the American way. It's not how we do things in general. And so I think that we don't really know how to respond in situations like this. We don't know how to respond. Folks in our community don't know how to respond. Folks experiencing homelessness don't know how to respond. There's a lot of underlying stress in the season. Even some of the jobs that, some of our folks experiencing homelessness do are what you would consider to be essential workers, grocery stores, different things like that. That's a lot of income levels, right? A lot of people get to stay at home. They get to work from home. I remember meeting with a contractor that, is a utility in Denver in July. We had been going to work and, since throughout this whole season. And he was telling me it was the first time he had been out of his house on a work thing since the pandemic started, which had been 3 months. And I think a lot of the folks who are experiencing homelessness don't get that luxury. They're working jobs that are stressful, and they go home, they go wherever, and they're concerned about getting sick. And so a lot of, I think, the stresses that we feel, they're experiencing as well. And so, again, I think we can find a lot of shared experiences with them. And I think that that's just important to realize too, in the midst of all this, is that there's a lot of hope in the sense that I think systems are having to answer to this new day. But I think the pandemic is, just as it's a weight on us, it's a weight on those experiencing homelessness as well. So.
Thank you, John. And I like that reminder too, that we're depending on these people who are now have some of the most important jobs, that I hope we can hold on to that. I hope we can hold on to how essential those jobs are. So I'm going to move on to our third and final question. So again, if you have questions, please be putting those in the Q&A link. How can we get involved in serving, from a serving perspective, and also if you want to talk about get involved in promoting programs for emergency, transitional, or permanent housing for individuals who are unhoused? What would you say to someone if they were saying, I want to get involved, what can I do? And we will also share this information. I'll have each one of our panelists share this in writing so that will be available to you if you contact me at nancy@dc2.me. But let's take our last 10 minutes and kind of talk about that, and then we'll go into our Q&A. So Don, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Nancy. I have put together what I call 10 ways to address homelessness. And let me discuss them briefly with you. The first thing is talk about the issue. Challenge the stereotypes when you are talking with friends, with neighbors, with people at church, whatever. If they start on stereotypes, challenge them. Talk about who the folks really are. Second, along with what Marty said, use people first language. People experiencing homelessness, not homeless people. The third is get to know someone who either has experienced or is currently experiencing homelessness. Fourth, engage your organizations, engage your congregations in responding. Fifth, address your local elected officials. One of the things is we haven't done a good enough job in saying to our local elected officials, hey, you've got to do this. This is important. So write, call, email your local elected officials. Sixth, reach out to national officials because the national scene is also important. Seventh, pay attention. Keep track of what's going on. A local newspaper, or for example, there's a wonderful electronic newspaper called Denverite, which does a wonderful job for both Denver and the metro area. Eight, volunteer. Go and do something with an organization. And I don't mean just serve meals, because you're on one side of the table, they're on the other side of the table. Again, it's a we-they kind of a proposition. Sit down with them and engage them in conversation. Ninth, join a group like this group or other groups. Get involved in that way. And 10th, provide financial support to organizations that are doing a good job. And the Refuge, Habitat, the Rescue Mission are three of a number of organizations that could use your financial assistance. So there are some few suggestions. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Susan, would you like to go next?
Sure. I would add to speaking to your elected officials to talk to candidates. Go to forums or send them notes directly, phone them, find out what their plans are to create affordable housing in your community and the state, and vote for those whose ideas you support. If they don't have a plan for addressing housing instability, then encourage them to create one. It's a priority. If enough people tell them it's a priority, suddenly it becomes a priority. As Don mentioned, reach out to the nonprofits working in your community and give of both your time and your resources, and touch base with family and friends and make sure they're doing okay in all of this. Stressors of both the pandemic and economic instability aren't always obvious to us, and too many people in our community are only 1 or 2 paychecks away from being homeless. So I think we can just be a closer, more aware community, and it can help us in a lot of ways.
Great, thank you, Susan. And John?
I think my call would just be very straightforward, and just get involved in the way that you can, and that would be anything from coming in and volunteering at any of these organizations at the Rescue Mission. My encouragement would be to come just serve a meal with us. You get to help prepare a meal. You get to interact with folks who are experiencing homelessness as they are receiving the meal. You get to talk to them. You get to sometimes work alongside those that are helping prepare the meal, who are in our recovery programs. The biggest thing again, my encouragement would be is I'll run into a lot of folks, and they want to come and serve, and they'll say, hey, I'm gonna send my kid. They really need to know what it means to realize how much they have and how thankful they should be. And I think the biggest thing in our world, right, is things are the saying is, things are caught rather than taught. I think if I really think we need to look inward, not outward. We don't need to tell other people what to do. We just need to do it. I'm all for voting, but I think the biggest way we'll see change is if we just do something, right? And then as we go about going out there and doing the things that this community needs, I think we will start to see the change that happens. It doesn't mean that we don't engage policymakers. I think that I know everyone on this panel is much more adept at that than I am. I think that they have great insights in that. But I think that often we wait for other folks to do things rather than for us to start to do something. And so just get involved in whatever that looks like for you. What's been laid on your heart, what burdens you in our society, and start to do something about it. And I think you'll start to see momentum in your life, and that will create a passion within you, a burning passion. And then you will be a force for change. And I think that's really what my encouragement would be.
Thank you, John. And I think you remind us too that like all of us have a different comfortability of where we're going to first jump in. So I just would encourage people, don't worry if your first step is smaller than somebody next to you. Like it's not a competition. It's finding that first place that you can dabble your feet in or dive in, depending on your personality, and then engage it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Marty, do you have some thoughts for us?
I do. And I would say that one of my favorite parts of this experience has been taking notes myself. So I've been taking notes this whole time of things that my fellow panelists have shared. So thank you all. There's a lot to think about for sure tonight. I would say a couple of things. I would say the first thing that I would challenge all of us to do is to take on some self-examination of ourselves and our communities. Because I think a lot of what's underneath these challenges that we face as local communities, as metro area, state, and beyond, have to do with our fears. Really, in a lot of ways, it's fears of the other, fears of these people that we don't understand, fears of these people who could harm us, fears of these people who could be dangerous, and that sort of othering prevents any sort of community. It leads to ideas like Don referred to earlier of not in my backyard. I don't want those sorts of people in my backyard. And it really exposes, I think, how we live most of our lives based on fear. Fear of the other, fear of the unknown. And on a more practical basis, I think for us in what might be referred to as suburbia is we're fearful of our own security. We don't want our property values to be affected. I'm a homeowner, and I know that's something that all homeowners kind of attach a lot of significance to for valid reasons. But part of the reason why we don't want people in our backyard, and we come up with all kinds of different reasons to not have these sorts of people move into affordable housing in our neighborhood. And this is an issue that Discovery Church itself has been dealing with for at least 7 years. So this is an issue that your community has dealt with. It's largely because people don't want their property values affected. And that's kind of greed. So if you profess to be someone who follows Christ, that shouldn't be the thing that is your main motivation. So that kind of leads into the second thing that I would challenge all of us to consider is to adjust our eyes and our ears. How do we see people and how do we hear when people talk? I myself am very motivated by Jesus' parable of the sheep and the goats from Matthew 25. And I think I would challenge everyone to go read that this evening, because I think what it does is it offers us a chance to meet Jesus in disguise, in the form of our neighbors who are unhoused, in the form of our neighbors who are housing unstable, in the form of our neighbors who are on the verge of eviction. And I think that's something that could really transform what we then decide to do. In terms of practical steps, I would challenge everyone to check the City of Broomfield website for information on an upcoming public hearing. It has not been scheduled yet, but there's going to be a public hearing about how to allocate a portion of funding that Broomfield received from Community Development Block Grant funds. And there are a number of advocates that are working toward trying to allocate a significant portion of those funds toward hotel vouchers for this winter, which I personally am very in favor of because it is a good short-term solution. And then at the same time, there are long-term solutions being discussed. Susan is very involved in that side of things and trying to actually build walls. Let's build some places for people to stay. And those are very important as well. But then I would just close by telling a very short story of a friend of mine whose name is Randy. And he has been a part of our community at the Refuge and the Refuge Cafe, as well as Holy Comforter Episcopal Church for a number of years. He's a Broomfield High School graduate, served in the Army Reserves, trained electrician, father and brother, and he died last week on the street alone in Broomfield. I think that should not be the case in a community like ours, a community that purports to be a hometown where everyone knows everyone and everyone is cared for. And when someone's in trouble, that we come alongside them. And so I'm asking myself, what more can I do so that there are no more Randys in Broomfield?
Thank you, Marty, for that challenge. It's a tragic and very sad story. I had the opportunity to meet Randy as well. So before we go into our questions, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for just incredible, thoughtful answers. As for kind of next steps for Discovery, always keep your eye out on events and offerings that we are doing through our local ministries. On the website, you'll see it on our social media, Facebook, emails. We do have a book study, kind of next step on this conversation coming up October 22nd through November 12th. It's a 4-week study on the book, Journeys Out of Homelessness, The Voices of Lived Experience. And our panelist, Donald Burns, is one of the co-authors of that book. He's also very graciously, thank you, Marty, offered to join that study. So he will be there for questions and thoughts. He's kind of asked to be a fly on the wall in a sense. So, but I'm sure that we can get him to share his thoughts as we're going through that. So that's available. You can find that on our website to sign up for. Or you can also contact me at nancy@dc2.me. So very excited to have that as one of our next steps. But be watching, or this is a conversation that's been incredibly important to Discovery for as long as Steve Cuss has been our pastor, and probably before that. But this is something that this is not a conversation that's going to go away. Susan, could you just briefly share where we're at with the habitat build on our property?
Oh, absolutely. We are in final permitting stages. I think right now we're waiting on some things back from engineering. And then we've been approved by the city for a $500,000 loan from the Affordable Housing Fund that was created, I think last fall. Don't think it's been quite a year yet. And so we are hoping to be breaking ground before the end of the year, which is incredibly exciting. And it'll be about a 4.5 year project for us.
Thank you, Susan. And that will be 4 triplexes. 3 of them will be case managed emergency or transitional housing So we're super excited about that. And that will certainly be new opportunities for people to serve, as long as, and you're all, of course, I mean, each one of these people have just great resources for you for serving as well. So contact me if you want more questions answered on that. So the next thing I'm going to do is invite Katie Hughes on. She's been hiding in the corner there. You see her K. Katie is a resident here at Discovery, and she actually has been working with me. And so she's going to share the questions. And if our panel would just, again, just kind of popcorn answers, we're going to let Katie ask her favorite questions first, and we'll move our way down the line of questions. And if you have thoughts, or if you have a question that you wish somebody would ask, please feel free to pop in. We said we're going to end at 7:45, but our panelists have all said they're willing to go a little bit longer if we need to. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, we had some great questions come up, and attendees, please continue to put some questions in if you still have some, or if some more come up. But one question that came up kind of in two different ways was a question that I've had for a long time, and yeah, I have talked about with friends too. So when you're driving and you come to someone who is experiencing homelessness on the side of the road and has a sign, what is the best way to help that person? Especially when we're talking about in the context of connection, is there a right answer? What do you guys think?
I'll speak to that one, and then looks like Don has something to say as well. But I think there are a number of things that people do that I think are equally legitimate. But I would say you can never go wrong by acknowledging someone's humanity. Don't ignore them. Don't pretend like they're not there. They're a person made in the image of God, and we need to acknowledge that. So at least say hi. Doesn't mean you have to give them cash. I know a lot of people have reservations about that, but at least say hi, offer a kind word. One thing that we've done at the Refuge for many years is create curb kits. So it includes items that are often helpful to people who are outside. So it includes socks, water bottle, because it's seen as not a very good job to have, to put it nicely, but it is hard work, especially when it's hot. So water bottle, chapstick, different things like that.
Apropos of what Marty just said, I want to share a story with you. I was stopped at a traffic light, and there was a young guy on the corner who held up his cardboard sign that said, I'm not cute enough to get whatever it was that he wanted to get. And I rolled down my window and said, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to give you, but I think you are cute enough. And he exploded with laughter and said, that is the best thing that's happened to me all day. And so it really is the human connection. And for heaven's sakes, don't ignore them. Can you imagine standing in one place for 6 hours and having 90% of the cars that go by you either look the other way or look down beside them so that they can't look you in the eye? I mean, how degrading is that? So at least acknowledge them. The other thing I would add is a lot of us are afraid to give money. And we're afraid to give money because we're afraid how they're going to spend it. And I don't know about you, but I have a mortgage on my house. And what if Uncle Sam said, you get your mortgage interest deduction, but I'm going to tell you how to spend it? We would be furious. So what right do we have to tell other people how they should spend their money?
Yeah, I would just add too that and personal convictions might vary, and I completely acknowledge that, but My view is if someone is asking for help and they say, I need some cash, okay, it's taking them at their word. That's how I view it.
Anybody else want to chime in?
I think everyone said really great stuff. So
Sounds great. I'm also taking notes. I'm glad you said that, Marty. That made me feel better that I can do that at the same time. Thank you guys for your input. That was super helpful. So another question that came up, someone asked or said, you named the systemic issues with policy that cause these issues. How do we join those doing good work to change policies? So we talked about voting. Is there anything else that you thought of that could, help us do good work to change these policies?
There are organizations in the metro area that are pushing hard as advocates to address poverty and homelessness. I'm associated with one, the Colorado Center on Law and Policy. There are other organizations like Housing Colorado. What's the food? What's the food one? There's a wonderful statewide organization that is addressing food. I mean, there are organizations like this that are very interested in addressing some of the systemic issues that are so critical. The Colorado Legal Association or Legal Center, and they've done a lot of work on addressing evictions. So email me, and I would be glad to give you names and contact information for various organizations. And then once you get that information, contact them, get involved.
And specifically in Broomfield, we've had an organization for the last several years that has been working to, I think, educate the community around housing instability. And, it's kind of slowed down a little bit as we kind of figure out how best to move forward, but it's the Broomfield Housing Opportunity Coalition. And it's just a grassroots organization. Marty is involved with it with me, as is Discovery Church. And it's just, we explore much of what we're exploring tonight and are supportive and active in the community with candidates and with elected officials on creating poverty policy that will help us make these systemic changes.
I would add, I'm glad Susan mentioned BHOC, so definitely check that out. It's housingbroomfield.com, I believe, right? Is it .com or .org? I always forget, Susan. I think it's .com. Anyway, it'll come up. Housing Broomfield, it's the Broomfield Housing Opportunity Coalition. Check that out online. I would say two things briefly. One area that really could use a lot of advocacy is mobile home issues. So mobile home residents, including in Broomfield, have really been exploited in a lot of different ways. And so getting involved with some of the local mobile home advocacy organizations would be a tremendous help, especially, a lot of the people that are involved in those organizations live in mobile homes, which is important. But if other members of the community came alongside them and said, hey, this is not okay in my larger community, I think that would go a long way. And then the second thing is on kind of a larger scale perspective is that I think we also need to examine why Broomfield is the way it is. And so I'll just say briefly that Broomfield intentionally, and there have been city leaders that publicly acknowledge this, Broomfield intentionally zoned for affluence. And this is a decade or two in the past, but that was an intentional decision that has had a drastic effect on the makeup of our community, as well as property values and the cost of housing in our community. So that's a huge conversation for another day, But I would just leave that with all of you who are connected in some way to Broomfield, because that's something that we as a community need to come to grips with.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm trying to decide which one to do next. So one question is on the topic of advocacy. So are there lawyers who are willing to help in this space, like renting/housing law, disability assistance, working to fight banks or mortgage companies? Can any of you speak into that?
The answer is absolutely. One of the staff at the Colorado Center is a guy named Jack Rogenbottom, and Jack is a lawyer and is fierce in his advocacy effort to address evictions. And he would be delighted to talk to folks. Our center also is closely connected to the Colorado Legal Center, and they have 20 to 25 pro bono lawyers, all of whom are interested in addressing one or another of these issues. So the answer is yes, there are lawyers who are interested in this. The Colorado ACLU is another organization that is very much interested in these kinds of issues. And unfortunately, the former director has just retired. I don't know the new director, but I certainly can find out. So yes, there are, and we can give you contact information for a lot of them.
Awesome. Susan, I have a question for you. So someone asks, do you feel there is a way in which we can challenge or pressure banks to be more accommodating to those receiving sudden unemployment benefits? And do you see ways in which banks are refusing to bend when it would not harm them to do so?
I think what it will take is a federal or state mandate that requires banks to consider unemployment insurance allowable income. Right now, that's not a requirement, and that would make, honestly, just such a huge difference. It's considered not allowable income because it has an end date, but quite frankly, many jobs are not guaranteed either. So I personally would love to see that change happen.
Sweet, thank you. Okay, one person asked, I have a friend who chooses to be unhoused, but feels extremely stuck and has an animal companion. What is it I can offer him besides my friendship?
Let me jump in here because this is something I feel very strongly about. People say that folks choose to live on the streets. If it's a choice between having a family member stay with me in a shelter and being forbidden to do that, or sleeping on the streets, I know very well what I would choose to do. I sleep on the streets. So in a sense, it's a choice, but it's a very unfortunate forced choice of two very unacceptable options. So I understand this poor fella's dilemma. And I've said earlier, we really have to redefine how we think about family as a concept, because that animal is part of that guy's family. There are some places, very few, but there are some places now that will allow an individual with a companion animal. And if you're interested, I can get more information about that. But it's going to be a tough slog. All the more reason for safe outdoor spaces.
Including in places like Broomfield, I would say, not just in downtown Denver. But I think this is why Susan's work and the work of Habitat and other organizations like it is so important, because ultimately speaking, the real solution for people in that situation is to have an actual place to, what do you say, bricks and mortar or four walls and whatever. That's what people in that situation need. And there really is no way getting around that. While I do agree with Don in terms of, different shelters and other organizations need to be more accommodating and redefine how we see family. And then I would also say too that what people really what has been stripped from people who are experiencing homelessness oftentimes is any sort of community. And that's been referred to several times by the different panelists, but it's not a simple thing or something to dismiss that you're a friend to this person. Being a friend and having community with someone is you can't discount that. It's huge, and that's one huge focus of what we do at the refuge is to offer a community, to offer hospitality and presence, and to offer people a place to belong, because that's they get kicked out of everywhere. So who's going to not kick them out is kind of the question they're going to ask, or they are asking.
Marty, I think that was well said, and I think the biggest thing I'd add is, as the provider that doesn't allow for pets to stay with folks, I think we've really come to value at the rescue mission the expression of how people are wanting to serve those experiencing homelessness, and partnerships. And so I think gone are the days where we're trying to be all things to all people, and we're realizing that I think we all have a role to play. And, I don't view the mission poorly for not allowing pets. I think that they, in the process of not allowing pets, they take care of a few hundred people. And then I think there are other organizations that are at a different scale, and they deserve support just as the mission does. And they do offer pets. I think Don's great question of, what is family, I think is really important. I also think Don's comment earlier about homeless prevention is equally important. I think, how do we prevent these, instances in the first place? We do a lot of vicarious trauma training at Denver Rescue Mission, and having an experience of homelessness is a traumatic event. And so, how do we prevent that from happening in the first place? I think it's a worthy conversation. And so, I think that however we can address that, but I think there's a lot of organizations doing a lot of great work, and I think it's great that we're trying to partner together to solve this. So
thank you, John. I want to pop in here real quick. Susan and Marty have added some of their contact information in the chat. If John or Don, you want to add that, feel free. I think we're going to just go with a couple more questions and then we'll close for the evening.
Nancy, before we go to another question, let me just pick up on what John said. There is one size does not fit all. And unfortunately, there is a great tendency to think, well, yes, housing first is the answer. It's the answer for some people. It's not the answer for everybody. And more we have to think about creating viable options for everybody to address the particular kinds of needs they have. And we really need to think in those terms. Sorry.
it's great.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Couple more questions. Yeah, then we're going to wrap up. So you talked about connection, and we talked about this in a lot of different ways, but what do you all feel like are the best ways to seek connection? Is it a program? Is it giving out food or supplies, giving money to those flying signs? What do you guys think?
I think someone mentioned it earlier, and it comes down to doing what is meaningful for you and where you start. You know, as Dawn and Marty both mentioned, just, you know, making eye contact with someone on the side of the street who's holding a sign, that's making connection, as is helping to define policy. You know, two huge extremes, but they're all making connection. And everything in between is important.
Thank you, Susan, for putting it that way. That was wonderful.
There-
And then, oh,
I'm sorry. There is a wonderful short video called When the Light Turns Red. And it's about a guy who comes to a traffic light and some guy's there holding a sign and the driver just chews him out. And he begins to experience this in different ways. And by the end of the video, it's 10, 11 minutes long. He has shifted gears 180 degrees. And now every time he's at a traffic light, he stops and says hi. So it's a wonderful short video.
that's awesome. I'll put that in the chat too. A logistics question for the Denver Rescue Mission. So for you, John, is there an age restriction to volunteers serving at the Denver Rescue Mission? So this person wanted to serve during the lockdown, but you had to be under 60. So
Yeah, we did the under 60 component then, I think, due to the COVID concerns and, you know, just not having enough information. And back then at that point, we were still serving meals to folks, and the CDC guideline wasn't to wear a mask. So as things were changing, you know, we were just trying to keep folks safe as we knew whatever was coming out. So if you go on to, you know, denverrescuemission.org and you click on serve, every one of those opportunities will share both what our current policy is on, you know, who can serve, both in terms of how old and how young. Some, you know, at certain locations, we also have age restrictions of 16 and older, and we do that for, you know, we don't really know what will happen. And so we don't want, you know, your 12-year-old coming and hearing something that they've never heard before, and you having to process through that on the way home. So I think by 16, hopefully they've heard enough that, you know, what they hear at a shelter wouldn't be that surprising. So yeah, so.
sweet. Thank you. Nancy, do you want me to ask any more?
Do you have more to ask?
You're muted, Nancy.
What did you say, Don?
I'm just, I mean, you obviously have more to ask. I'm perfectly happy to stay on and answer more questions, but
Why don't you pick your last favorite one, and then we'll go on for the night.
Okay. Someone asked, do your organizations also have resources and deal with the effects of homelessness, such as shame and depression, etc.? So what services would they have?
I think for Denver Rescue Mission, you know, I'll speak specifically to our shelters. I think one of our goals is to have them exit the shelter system as quickly as possible. The shelter system is it can be at times a chaotic environment. We're trying to connect them to services of where they want to go next. And so for us, you know, we're really trying to, you know, provide relationships with organizations, with folks, with whoever they want to go to be able to take that next step. So I think for a long time, we try to do outreach ourselves. And I think the environment of a shelter isn't conducive to feeling safe. Feeling safe is a detrimental step in someone taking the need to change, right? Like you know, all of us, if we don't feel safe, we're going to search for safety first before we do something else. And so for us, we're really trying to move them out of shelter to the next step, so that then they can hopefully meet with Marty or Susan or whatever organization is out there that is going to start meeting with them and having conversations about what's going on. So yeah, I think that's the role that we're learning to play in all of this. We can have over 1,000 people per night stay at our facilities. And so our goal is to really try to exit them out of the shelter system to somewhere that's helpful.
I would add too, this is a piece about the rescue mission that for all the about 10 years that I've been doing this sort of work, I've always heard the rescue mission reputation is not as, hey, I'm going to go to the Denver Rescue Mission, but I'm going to go to Jesus Saves, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, we try to brand ourselves as Denver Rescue Mission Lawrence, but most of the people on the street say, hey, I'm going to go see
Jesus Saves. Yeah, and I think there's something to say for an organization like John's that has worked for so many years to serve people on the margins. But I would also add that Discovery Church, as many of you know on this call, is actually the king or the queen, however you want to see it, of support groups, because they have so many support groups and they have some awesome support groups, which Nancy's been involved in and some other friends that do amazing work. In regard to people who are in the situation of being unhoused, the Refuge did start last spring, right before COVID, in partnership with one of our co-pastors and our intern from Metro, who I believe is on the call tonight, Angie Koenig, started a support group for people who are in the midst of homelessness. And it's a support group meant to it's not to talk about solutions, although there are very important places for that, but it's just meant to be a place where people can talk about how hard it is, how things are going. And so that if anyone's interested in connecting someone to that group, then just send me an email.
Any last thoughts?
I have to jump in and add to what Marty has said. We all have networks of support that we can call on. It's what I say, who do you call at 2 o'clock in the morning when you have a crisis? Well, I've got people I can call. All of you have people you can call. By and large, these folks don't. And so creating networks of support is absolutely critical. And there are models for doing that. One of the models is 12-step programs. I'm not suggesting that homelessness is anything like an addiction, but the organizing and sort of logistical concept behind 12-step programs is absolutely suited to working with groups of folks who are experiencing homelessness. You have regular meetings, you have sponsors or other people who have also experienced homelessness in the past who can provide ideas and support. And a sense of responsibility to the group. And all of that would be wonderful in terms of additional support groups. So I applaud Discovery Church for all the support groups there. And think about creating additional ones.
This has been just so challenging and just rich. So again, I just want to thank our panelists, Donald Burns, Marty Dormish, John Moreri, and Susan Luther for your time tonight and for your thoughtfulness that you can really tell you did your homework as you came tonight, that you thought through these questions and ways to bring information that would be challenging and helpful to our attendees. So I can't thank you enough. It's been an incredible honor to get to be on the panel with you. And I would love to hear from those of you who are listening in if you want more of this, would you please let us know, and we can figure out ways to continue the conversation. And like I said, we also have our book study coming up October 22nd through the 12th with Don's book, which I'm so excited to do, Journey Out of Homelessness, Voices of Lived Experience. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us and for our panelists. And I just, God bless you. Have a good night. And don't let these words fall to the ground. Pick them up, look at them, every facet of them, and find out where it is that you are being called to participate in solutions. These people, all people that we've talked about, are created in God's image. We are the same, so much more the same than we are different. So I think we heard that over and over again. And I know for me, the people that I've met along the way, I have some of my best friends I've met through situations like this, and they are just so important to me. They remind me what's important. They remind me what true joy is when I get stuck in my abundance. And I am forever grateful for knowing people who have experienced homelessness, who are currently experiencing homelessness, and have the perspective that I don't have because I am privileged. And it changes you. So I would encourage you, figure out ways to step in, to make friends, and to be changed. So I'm going to say good night. We're going to put up a slide with information about the book study. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.
Well, and thank you for
Nancy and Katie.
inviting us to be with you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.